that last point that Lori was making is such a vital point. And this is why, there is so much emphasis right now in the presidential race. This is why when Donald Trump gives a speech and says he's going to put a 35% tariff on goods coming in from Mexico, people cheer. Because we used to have a 35% tariff on goods coming in from Mexico. And guess what? We made those things in the United States because who wants to make them in Mexico and pay a 35% tax on the import? We had factories all over this country. We've lost 60,000 of those factories just in the last decade and a half. We've probably lost, a couple 100,000 factories since we really went crazy with free trade in the early 90s. And unlike every other country in the world that engages, that has trade as a big part of their economy, we have no way to give a favorable benefit to American manufacturers and American workers. Instead, we give the benefit to companies that send their jobs, that have their workers overseas and that place their factories overseas, or simply foreign corporations. And as Lori was describing it, this is how it works. South Korea does this. Taiwan does this. China does this. Germany does this. France does it. The UK does it. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. I mean, you name it. Right? The countries of the world that all, very happily said, oh, yeah, sure, World Trade Organization, no problem. We'll do away with tariffs. They simply replace their tariffs with VAT taxes, value-added taxes. And the way a VAT tax works is real simple. At every stage in the manufacturing process, the manufacturer pays, and it's typically different manufacturers as something is made. The manufacturer pays a small tax on the added value. So, when the mining company mines the iron ore and sells it to a company that is going to smelt it into iron, as that ore becomes iron, it has increased in value. There's a small tax. They add a couple of pennies to every ton of it. And then as the iron is then turned into steel by another company, by a steel mill, there's a small tax added to it. And then as the steel is turned into rolled steel or flat steel, there's a small tax added to it. And as that steel is turned into the door for a car, there's a small tax on it. And as the door is put on the car, there's a small tax on it. And by the time you're done building the car, you've got this 17% overall VAT tax built into the car. And it's been done in small increments. So it's like nobody gets like just giant whacked with a tax all at once, because the people who are anti-VAT tax are running around going, it's a sales tax. It's a regressive tax. Well, arguably, in a way, it is. But in terms of its impact on international trade, it's not at all regressive. It keeps jobs in the country. So, those of you who have traveled internationally and bought anything of value, you know what I'm talking about. I think I told this story last year. I was in Australia back, 15 years ago, doing a speaking circuit with Neil Donald Walsh and Marianne Williamson, and we were talking about, I was talking about my book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, and they were talking about their stuff. And first of all, I had to get a permit, a work permit, which took me the better part of 2 or 3 months to come to Australia and collect a speaking fee. So number one, the money that I was making there, I had to have permission of the country to come there as a worker. And then number two, when I got there, I don't remember if I had forgotten to bring a sports coat or the one that I had brought got ruined or whatever, but I ended up in this store having to buy a sports coat for my speeches. And the coat that I bought, I decided, hey, I'll get a good coat it'll last me another decade and well made and so it was, I don't remember the price now, but let's say $400 or $500, something like that. It was a good coat. And when I was leaving the guy gives me the receipt and he says there's a 17% VAT tax on this or whatever it was, the percentage was. And he said, when you are at the airport, give this receipt to them and they'll give you the money back. So it was basically, subsidizing an export. And in fact, when I left the country, I went to the airport and I said, okay, here's all my receipts. And they gave me a bunch of money. And many of you have had that experience. If you've traveled internationally, you know exactly what I'm talking about. VAT taxes subsidize exports and penalize imports. Because if I wanted to import something into Australia, rather than other than just myself, I would have to pay a VAT tax on the import. So it's not like there's free trade out there. There's no such thing, first of all, as free trade. Just like there's no such thing as a free market. Markets are created by governments. Trade is facilitated by very specific rules. But number one. But number two, the idea that everybody has dropped their barriers to trade, their tariffs, is complete BS. The barriers to trade now are called VAT taxes. And countries aggressively impose those things. And that's why American-made cars are not being sold overseas. That's why we're building that's why Ford is building factories in Germany. And it's in part, well, I'm running out of time here, but you get the point. We're being screwed because we're not smart enough to figure this stuff out, or our politicians are just so complicit.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
And this is why when Donald Trump says 35% import tax, everybody goes, yeah, and it's because those people know it'll work.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.